The sun rose over Fort Eisenhower, painting the sprawling base in hues of gold and crimson. Soldiers were already moving through the yards, boots clanging on concrete, voices carrying across the morning chill. Among them, a new figure appeared, a woman, stepping off the transport bus with a calm, deliberate stride. Her uniform was pristine, her posture perfect, and her gaze was steady, scanning the surroundings with the precision of someone accustomed to being watched and commanding attention. She was the new recruit, though her presence suggested far more than simple enlistment. Whispers began almost immediately. A few soldiers, leaning against the walls of the barracks, nudged one another and whispered her name, though few knew it. Some had caught vague hints in the morning report. She had been promoted unusually fast, bypassing many intermediate ranks. Others had only heard rumors, elite missions overseas, commendations awarded in secrecy, operations so sensitive they weren't supposed to exist outside of classified files. And yet there she was, walking toward the training yard with the same quiet confidence one would expect from someone who had already proven herself countless times. Her boots clicked with a steady rhythm on the concrete as she approached the officers' quarters. Soldiers stopped mid-step, unsure whether to greet her formally or pretend not to notice. Most simply stared. Some smirked, assuming she must be inexperienced. She was, after all, a new girl on the base. But the instant she walked past them, her aura, calm, controlled, and subtly commanding, made the bravest soldier hesitate. There was something in the way she held herself, in the way she observed everything and everyone, that hinted at power not yet revealed. At the entrance to the barracks, a young private, emboldened by curiosity and a touch of arrogance, attempted a casual joke. "First day nerves, huh? Don't get lost in the drills." His tone was half laugh, half test. She glanced at him without anger, without even a flicker of fear, her eyes steady and assessing. "I've already walked this yard in my mind," she said softly, almost a whisper. The words were simple, but delivered with an authority that made him step back. Even he felt the weight of her presence. By mid-morning, she had been introduced formally to the rest of the recruits and some senior non-commissioned officers. Names, ranks, and protocols were exchanged in brisk efficiency, but she had a way of listening that made each person feel as if she had already memorized their entire career and capabilities. Observers couldn't place it at first, but there was an intensity in her attention, like a predator calculating, or a chess master seeing 5 moves ahead. Her quiet confidence contrasted sharply with the casual arrogance of some recruits, creating a tension that spread like wildfire. The first training session was scheduled for mid-morning in the expansive drill yard. Soldiers gathered in formation, the air buzzing with excitement and the usual undercurrent of competitiveness. She stepped forward to join the line, noting every soldier's posture, every misalignment in formation, every hesitation. She didn't correct them openly. Instead, she moved with fluidity, silently setting a standard of precision that could not be ignored. Some soldiers whispered, "Who is she really?" While others muttered, "She's probably just lucky, everyone thinks she's special at first." But luck had nothing to do with her. Even as the sergeant barked commands, she executed each drill with a quiet perfection that left onlookers awed. Her movements were not just correct, they were efficient, elegant, and purposeful. Footwork, stance, marksmanship drills, each demonstrated an experience far beyond her apparent rank. The whispers grew louder, the curiosity turning into a mix of admiration and nervousness. Some soldiers, the ones with the biggest egos, started to view her as a threat. They had assumed she would be easy to intimidate, a newcomer to the rigors of the base, someone they could challenge to assert dominance. They were wrong. During a brief break, she stood aside from the group, scanning the surrounding terrain. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, missed nothing. The uneven ground, the way shadows fell near the training equipment, the subtle shifts in the recruits' attention. A few soldiers lingered nearby, trying to size her up, exchanging quiet bets about whether she would crack under pressure. She noticed them, of course. But instead of reacting with anger or arrogance, she simply gave a small, polite nod, as if acknowledging their presence without granting them any importance. That nod carried weight, enough to unsettle them without a word. Lunch hour brought more whispers, now circling like a storm. A group of soldiers huddled at the edge of the mess hall, discussing her background in low voices. "I heard she led a unit overseas, like actual combat missions," one muttered. Another scoffed. "Yeah, right, they promote anyone these days. Bet she's just lucky." And yet no one dared challenge her directly. Even the most cocky soldiers sensed that her presence demanded respect, whether they liked it or not. It wasn't just her words or appearance. It was the calm confidence, the way she occupied space without effort. By late afternoon, the first test of her reputation arrived in subtle form. A few recruits tried casual intimidation, leaning in too close during drills, testing the limits of her patience with sarcastic remarks. She didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she continued her training exercises with flawless execution. Occasionally, she'd give a brief, precise correction, never more than a few words, but each one carried the authority of someone accustomed to command. Slowly, the whispers shifted from skepticism to awe. This was no ordinary recruit. This was someone who had been forged in fire, whose every move exuded competence. As the day ended, soldiers were exhausted but captivated. Some had started to recognize the gap between assumptions and reality. The ones who had mocked her were quiet, uncomfortable in their own bravado. She had arrived quietly, without fanfare, yet her presence had already changed the atmosphere on the base. Rumors of promotions, commendations, and elite missions began to circulate more openly, carried in whispers from barracks to mess hall to training yard. And though she never spoke of her past, her actions told the story far more powerfully than words ever could. By sunset, as the sky blazed with streaks of orange and pink, she stood alone on the drill yard for a moment, watching the soldiers leave for the evening. Her calm, confident posture remained unbroken. No one knew her full story yet, but they would soon. And when they did, those who had doubted her would realize they had been standing before not just a recruit, but a force that commanded respect simply by existing. Her arrival had been quiet, but the ripple effect had already begun, and the base would never be the same again. The morning air at Fort Eisenhower was crisp, carrying a faint metallic tang from the nearby training yard. Soldiers gathered for their first tactical exercise of the week, boots echoing on concrete as formation lines were called. Conversations buzzed with low-level competition, but most eyes kept drifting toward the new recruit, the woman who had arrived quietly the day before and already unsettled the base. Her calm demeanor, flawless drills, and piercing gaze had left everyone intrigued, some even intimidated. Among the onlookers, a group of young soldiers, brimming with bravado, decided it was time to assert themselves. Their leader, a tall, broad-shouldered private with a swagger born of overconfidence, whispered to his companions. "Let's see if the new girl is all talk," he said, his tone a mix of mockery and challenge. He hadn't expected fear from anyone new in the unit, and yet something about her steady gaze the day before had unsettled him. The others nodded, smirking. This was their chance to show dominance, to reclaim the pride of seasoned recruits over the outsider. None of them had considered what they were about to unleash. The group waited for the instructor to step away, for a moment when her attention was focused on the tactical map, and then moved in. The private deliberately edged close, his fist raised slightly, not a full strike, just enough to imply a threat. "Hey, newbie," he said, voice loud enough to draw attention. "Think you can handle life here?" A few other soldiers snickered behind him, enjoying what they assumed would be an easy moment of intimidation. But she didn't flinch. She didn't even step back. Instead, she turned to face him fully, her eyes steady, assessing, calculating. There was no anger, no panic, only a calm, almost imperceptible smile that unnerved him more than any scream or slap could have. Every soldier in the vicinity froze, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Something about her presence, her posture, the confidence that radiated from her, made the boldest among them hesitate. The aggressor's smirk faltered as he caught her gaze, realizing for the first time that he had underestimated her. "I suggest you rethink that stance," she said quietly, her voice soft but carrying a weight that made even the spectators pause. It wasn't a threat, it was an observation, a precise assessment. Every action has a consequence. Make sure you understand yours. Her words were measured, almost gentle, yet they carried the authority of someone accustomed to command. The private opened his mouth to retort, but nothing came. His bravado faltered under the weight of her calm certainty. For a brief moment, silence blanketed the yard. Fellow recruits exchanged nervous glances. Some tried to hide their surprise, others mouthed questions silently, but no one could deny it. This new recruit was unlike anyone they had encountered before. Her reputation, though largely unknown, had begun to manifest in real time. The soldiers who thought they could intimidate her now felt an unfamiliar tension, an inkling of fear creeping into their chest. It was subtle but unmistakable. The private attempted a shift, a feint to regain dominance, but she responded with subtle precision. Without raising her voice, she stepped slightly forward, closing the space between them in a way that left him off balance. It was not aggressive, yet it was unyielding, a silent command that conveyed control. "Stop," she said, a single word. It carried finality, a tone that demanded obedience without a need for shouting. In that instant, the entire group recognized that they were dealing with someone whose authority was earned, not assumed. The instructor returned at that moment, sensing the charged atmosphere. He raised an eyebrow, observing the unusual standoff. Normally, minor confrontations like this would escalate into shoving or verbal skirmishes, but here, the energy was different. The young private, still uncertain, attempted a laugh, trying to mask his discomfort. But the confidence radiating from the new recruit had already begun to shift the power dynamic. Other soldiers in the line straightened instinctively, acknowledging her presence without realizing they were doing it. Her calm composure was a lesson in itself. While others relied on physical strength or loud intimidation, she demonstrated that authority could be conveyed with precision, patience, and controlled action. She executed the rest of the drill with flawless efficiency, each movement purposeful, each command clear. Observers whispered among themselves, "She's no ordinary recruit. Who is she?" The young private and his companions exchanged uneasy glances, realizing their attempt to assert dominance had failed spectacularly. They had misjudged her completely. By mid-morning, the whispers about her abilities and past exploits began circulating again. Some soldiers speculated wildly about her previous missions, imagining combat scenarios and high-stakes operations that might explain her confidence. Others resisted believing the stories, insisting that she must have lucked into her promotions. But her performance, her command of presence, and her unwavering calm told a different story. Actions, not rumors, had now proven her exceptional. During a break, she approached the water station, her posture relaxed but precise. The private who had attempted the punch lingered nearby, trying to regain some composure. You're different," he muttered, his voice lacking the usual swagger. She smiled faintly, without arrogance. "Different doesn't mean better," she replied. "It just means you need to reassess what you know." Her words weren't a threat, they were a mirror, reflecting their arrogance back at them. And for the first time, the private felt the sting of humility, something he had rarely encountered in his short career. The rest of the day passed with exercises, drills, and strategy briefings, but the attempted confrontation had left a lasting impression. The new recruit's calm, precise handling of the situation became a quiet lesson in authority. Soldiers began watching her more closely, analyzing her every move, learning from her example. The failed intimidation attempt had unintentionally established her dominance in a subtle, undeniable way. By the time the sun began to dip behind the horizon, the young private and his companions were no longer focused on mocking her. They were observing, learning, and, without admitting it aloud, respecting her abilities. As the day ended, the base quieted. Soldiers retired to their quarters, still buzzing about the encounter. The new recruit remained behind for a brief moment, scanning the training yard one last time. She knew the challenge had been merely a taste of the tensions that awaited her. But she also knew the lesson had been delivered. Authority isn't claimed through force. It's recognized through competence, calm, and unwavering confidence. And already, those who had tried to undermine her had learned, in their own subtle ways, that they were dealing with someone far beyond their understanding. The night settled over Fort Eisenhower, the training yard empty except for shadows stretching across concrete and grass. The whispers of the day's events began to morph into stories, shared quietly among soldiers who now understood that the new girl was no ordinary recruit. They had tested her, and failed, and the echoes of that failure would ripple through the base in ways they hadn't yet begun to grasp. The challenge had been issued by the young private, but the true power, the quiet, unshakable authority of the new recruit, had already been established. The morning sun had barely risen when the new recruit returned to the training yard. There was a quiet intensity to her movements, as if each step was measured, each glance purposeful. The soldiers, still buzzing from yesterday's failed attempt at intimidation, watched her warily from across the yard. Her presence was no longer a curiosity. It had become a subtle assertion of power, an unspoken challenge to anyone who doubted her capabilities. Those who had tried to confront her before felt a new, unfamiliar tension, a prickling awareness that authority could manifest without loud declarations, without brash actions, without violence. She started the day with the standard drills, but even these simple exercises took on a new dimension under her execution. Every movement was precise, deliberate, and perfectly timed. She corrected minor errors with minimal words, sometimes just a quiet gesture, yet each correction carried a weight far heavier than any shouted command. Observers whispered, "She doesn't raise her voice, she doesn't need to." Even the most arrogant soldiers began to notice that she was shaping the yard not through force, but through mastery, through subtle dominance that could not be challenged openly. The group that had attempted to intimidate her the day before lingered nearby, attempting to gauge their standing. They watched as she seamlessly executed each drill, corrected recruits, and moved with an ease that suggested deep experience. Their bravado, which had carried them through countless small victories among peers, began to falter. For the first time, they felt uncertain, almost insignificant in comparison. She didn't humiliate them, didn't assert superiority overtly. She merely existed in a way that commanded respect, and the contrast was crushing. During a tactical exercise, she demonstrated a remarkable skill in observing and predicting movement. Soldiers paired up for hand-to-hand simulation, and she silently evaluated each pair. When the young private who had tried to punch her approached, he stiffened, expecting perhaps another confrontation. Instead, she subtly demonstrated a technique with her partner, a small shift, a controlled redirection of force, and the result was precise and flawless. "Notice the angle here," she said quietly, not looking directly at him, yet her gaze seemed to penetrate his awareness. "Anticipate, don't react." The lesson, though subtle, was devastating. He could feel it without needing to acknowledge it aloud. He had been outclassed, outmaneuvered, and outthought. He wasn't the only one. Others nearby, who had tried to belittle her before, exchanged nervous glances, realizing that this new recruit possessed a depth of skill and experience far beyond what they had imagined. Rumors of her overseas missions, commendations, and rapid promotions no longer seemed far-fetched. They were starting to make sense. The remainder of the morning passed with drills that tested endurance, teamwork, and strategy. She quietly orchestrated each exercise, offering corrections, suggestions, and encouragement, but never in a way that drew attention to herself. Soldiers began to notice patterns in her guidance. She anticipated problems before they arose, adjusted team dynamics with subtle interventions, and demonstrated leadership that seemed effortless. Her influence grew not through intimidation, but through example, through the quiet efficacy of a person accustomed to authority. By midday, whispers were everywhere. Some soldiers speculated on her background, inventing scenarios to explain her extraordinary composure and skill. Others were more skeptical, unwilling to admit the obvious, that she had been underestimated and found utterly unassailable. The young private who had tried to punch her avoided eye contact whenever she passed, his usual confidence replaced by a growing, uneasy respect. Even the instructors, seasoned officers with decades of experience, began to notice that her precision and calm judgment were exceptional. During a brief water break, she approached the edge of the yard where a small cluster of recruits had gathered. Some tried to engage her in casual conversation, attempting humor or familiarity, but she responded with measured, deliberate answers, always maintaining her composure. "Focus on execution, not theatrics," she said softly, yet everyone present felt the weight of the statement. It was a subtle warning. Skill and preparation mattered far more than noise or bravado. Those who had tried to mock her were learning, quietly, that the battlefield of respect could be won without confrontation. After lunch, the tactical drills resumed, this time incorporating simulated stress scenarios. The recruits had to navigate obstacles, respond to unexpected commands, and adapt in real time. She moved among them like a shadow, observing, correcting, and guiding. When one soldier, she gently demonstrated the proper technique, her calm patience contrasting with the usual frustration of the instructors. Every action was a lesson, every word a subtle assertion of authority. Those who had doubted her were learning that leadership could be present without loud declarations, that competence alone could inspire both respect and awe. The young private found himself struggling to keep pace, not physically but mentally. He had assumed yesterday's confrontation had defined their relationship, that he had the upper hand in perception. Now every subtle correction, every quiet observation, every deliberate movement reinforced her superiority. He realized that respect, real respect, could not be demanded, it had to be earned, and she had earned it effortlessly through calm observation, precise execution, and unwavering confidence. The lesson was unspoken but undeniable. Arrogance could be dismantled quietly, with skill and composure. As the day drew to a close, the recruits lined up for the final inspection. She stood among them, relaxed but vigilant, scanning the formation with the same sharp, deliberate awareness she had shown since arriving. Soldiers who had whispered, snickered, or attempted to intimidate her were subdued, their previous confidence replaced by acknowledgement of her competence. Even those who had been openly critical could not deny the truth. She commanded authority simply by existing, by executing her duties with unparalleled precision and poise. By evening, the base had begun to shift subtly. Conversations that had once centered on gossip and bravado were now tinged with curiosity, admiration, and respect. The young private who had tried to punch her avoided her gaze, internally chastised, aware that he had misjudged someone whose experience and competence far exceeded his imagination. Her subtle warnings, quiet corrections, precise demonstrations, and calm authority had done more than teach lessons in drills. They had reshaped perceptions, recalibrated assumptions, and established her presence as a force not to be questioned. The shadows lengthened across the training yard as she walked toward the barracks, her posture unbroken, her steps deliberate. The day had been long, but she moved with the energy of someone fully in control, completely aware of her surroundings and her impact on those around her. The whispered stories of her past, combined with her flawless execution of skill, had begun to settle into the collective consciousness of the recruits. She was someone to be observed, respected, and learned from, not challenged lightly. That night, as soldiers reflected on the day, the incident in the yard became a lesson in subtle authority. She had shown that intimidation could be countered not with aggression, but with skill. That respect could be commanded not with words, but with precise, confident action. The young private and his companions had been humbled without a single overt confrontation, only through the quiet, powerful presence of someone who had already mastered the principles of leadership and command. By the time the base fell silent, the lesson was clear. The new recruit was not merely a newcomer. She was a force, a leader in waiting, a master of subtlety and strategy. And those who had doubted her, even for a moment, would carry the memory of her calm, precise authority with them for a long time, unsure if they had been lucky to learn the lesson so gently or unlucky to face her at all. The next morning dawned gray and cool, a thin fog drifting across the training yard. Soldiers filed in, their uniforms crisp, boots echoing in the silence of early formation. Even before the first drill began, whispers spread. The new girl would be present. Many were still recovering from yesterday's lessons, the subtle but undeniable display of skill and authority she had demonstrated. Among them, a few remained stubbornly skeptical, unwilling to accept what they had seen as reality. Chief among them was the tall private who had attempted to punch her days earlier, still nursing bruised pride and fragile ego. He had spent the night replaying the encounter over and over, trying to rationalize his failure. His friends had told him not to worry. Everyone knew she was a new recruit, and he had the advantage of youthful confidence. Yet he felt something he had never felt before, a gnawing sense of doubt. When he entered the training yard that morning and saw her standing among the line of soldiers, calm, poised, scanning the area with quiet precision, his unease grew. She radiated a self-assurance that was impossible to fake. The first drill began as routine obstacle training. Soldiers sprinted, vaulted over walls, and navigated crawling tunnels. She moved with them, seamless in execution, correcting small errors here and there with almost imperceptible gestures. Even the instructors noticed her precision, her awareness, her ability to anticipate problems before they occurred. It was no longer curiosity or suspicion, it was respect. Those who had doubted her found themselves paying attention, realizing that she was shaping the yard not through words, but through action. By mid-morning, tension began to build. The tall private, driven by lingering arrogance and frustration, decided he could no longer let his pride be quietly undermined. During a brief pause, he stepped closer, his chest puffed, his voice carrying a mix of mockery and challenge. "Think you're the queen of this place, huh? Maybe we should test that confidence of yours." A few other recruits exchanged glances, unsure whether to intervene or let the confrontation unfold. The atmosphere thickened instantly, every soldier sensing that a confrontation was imminent. She turned slowly, meeting his gaze. There was no fear, no flinch, no trace of doubt. Her eyes, steady and penetrating, assessed him in seconds. Then she spoke, her voice calm but undeniably commanding. "You need to understand something," she said, each word deliberate. "Confidence is earned, not assumed. What you're trying to prove is not about skill, it's about ego, and ego has consequences." Her words were soft, almost gentle, yet they carried a weight that froze him in place. The private shifted uncomfortably, trying to reclaim dominance with bravado. "Ego? You think I don't know how to lead? You're new here, you don't know the rules." His companion stifled laughter, thinking he was about to reassert control. But her reaction was not confrontation, it was demonstration. She moved closer, just enough to assert presence without aggression, and adjusted her stance slightly, perfectly balanced. Then, in a single fluid motion, she redirected a minor imbalance he made, demonstrating skill and control without a word. The lesson hit instantly. The young private, accustomed to relying on physical presence and loud words, felt completely off balance, not just physically but mentally. The realization struck him like a shock. He had underestimated her entirely. His ego, his bravado, even his assumptions about rank and capability, all of it was irrelevant in the presence of someone who had mastered authority without needing to prove it through force. Around them, other soldiers watched in silent astonishment, some holding their breath, unsure how the confrontation would end. The tension rippled through the yard as she finally spoke again. "Leadership is not about proving strength," she said softly, her tone calm, measured. "It is about precision, awareness, and responsibility. You have neither precision nor awareness if you cannot see beyond your own ego." The private could only nod, realizing he had been schooled without humiliation. He had learned a lesson in seconds that he could not unlearn. She was not merely a recruit, but someone whose presence demanded acknowledgement. Her quiet demonstration of authority resonated with the other soldiers. Some who had quietly mocked her before now found themselves reconsidering every assumption. The yard, once buzzing with casual competitiveness and bravado, had shifted into a space of quiet tension and unspoken respect. She had not raised her voice, struck a single blow, or belittled anyone, but the impact was undeniable. The attempted confrontation had transformed into an authority, subtly delivered through skill, composure, and precision. By noon, rumors had begun circulating again among soldiers who had not been present during the incident. Whispers of her accomplishments overseas, her rapid promotion, and her strategic genius spread quickly. Some scoffed, unwilling to believe it. Others nodded in quiet understanding. The young private who had challenged her was now cautious, careful, aware that any further attempt at confrontation would only reinforce the lesson he had just learned. Respect, he realized, was not optional, it was commanded through competence. Later that afternoon, the exercises shifted to team strategy. She observed every interaction, noting strengths and weaknesses, subtle errors and unspoken tensions. When disagreements arose among soldiers, she intervened with quiet authority, redirecting focus and encouraging collaboration without overtly taking sides. Her presence was magnetic, shaping behavior not through dominance but through subtle cues and strategic guidance. The private who had challenged her found himself following her example reluctantly, learning the unspoken rules of leadership through observation. Even the instructors began to acknowledge her impact. Her approach to strategy, her patience with mistakes, and her ability to maintain calm under pressure impressed even the most seasoned officers. They exchanged quiet glances, aware that the new recruit was reshaping dynamics in ways few could have anticipated. The yard, once chaotic with youthful energy and challenges, now functioned more efficiently, guided by her subtle but undeniable authority. As evening approached, the tall private lingered behind during cleanup, still grappling with the lessons of the day. His ego had been deflated, his assumptions shattered, yet there was a growing respect forming, reluctant, careful, but undeniable. He watched as she moved among the equipment, quietly correcting mistakes, offering guidance, and observing the soldiers with unerring precision. It became clear to him that she was not simply a recruit or a stranger. She was a force of experience and discipline, and no act of bravado could ever unseat her authority. By sunset, the base was quiet, the day's confrontation already becoming a story told in whispers and glances. Soldiers who had doubted her, mocked her, or challenged her in small ways now recognized a simple truth. She was in command, not through words, not through intimidation, but through sheer mastery of skill, awareness, and leadership. The private who had attempted to assert dominance that morning carried the lesson with him, aware that the encounter would shape his behavior for the foreseeable future. The shadows stretched across the yard as she walked toward the barracks, calm and composed. No one followed, and yet every soldier present felt the impact of her presence. The attempted confrontation had transformed into a demonstration of undeniable authority. She had not needed to strike, shout, or belittle anyone. With subtle gestures, precise movements, and measured words, she had commanded respect and left a lasting impression. That night, as soldiers reflected on the day, the lesson was clear. Challenges to authority were futile when faced with competence, composure, and experience. The young private, once brash and overconfident, lay awake replaying the events, realizing he had been taught a lesson he would not forget. And the rest of the base, whether acknowledging it or not, had begun to see the truth. The new recruit was no ordinary soldier. She was a leader, a force, a presence that demanded respect before rank or title was ever revealed. The morning sun broke over Fort Eisenhower, casting a warm glow over the training yard. Soldiers filed in, their boots clicking rhythmically against the concrete, still processing the events of the past few days. The atmosphere was unusually tense yet charged with curiosity. Rumors of the new recruit's unmatched skills had already spread like wildfire, whispers floating from barracks to mess hall. Even the instructors exchanged knowing glances, murmuring about her precision, calm authority, and uncanny ability to command respect without raising her voice. But no one truly knew her full story. The day began with a routine inspection. Soldiers lined up, uniforms immaculate, eyes straight ahead. She stood at the edge of the formation, observing with that same quiet intensity that had unsettled so many. The young private who had previously attempted to assert dominance hovered at the back, uneasy. His ego, once unshakable, had been humbled, replaced with cautious attention. But nothing could have prepared him, or anyone, for the revelation that was about to unfold. The sergeant stepped forward, holding an official document, his expression serious. "Recruits," he called, his voice carrying across the yard, "today we acknowledge a special update regarding one of your fellow soldiers." A hush fell immediately. All eyes turned toward her. The private's stomach sank. Curiosity and apprehension mingled in his chest. His instincts screamed that this was more than a routine announcement. With a brief nod to the sergeant, she stepped forward, her posture composed, every motion deliberate. "Good morning," she said quietly, her voice calm, commanding yet polite. Soldiers instinctively straightened, sensing the gravity of the moment. "Attention," the sergeant added, holding up the document. "Effective immediately, you are to recognize and respect her as a general in the United States Army." The yard erupted in stunned silence. Murmurs swept through the formation. Some recruits blinked, unable to process the information. The private who had tried to punch her felt his chest tight. General. The woman he had underestimated, humiliated in his mind through his own failed bravado, was no ordinary officer. She was the very definition of authority, her rank earned through decades of service, leadership, and unmatched skill. She remained calm, almost serene, as the realization rippled through the soldiers. Some stared openly, jaws slack. Others whispered among themselves, finally connecting the dots. Her flawless execution of drills, precise corrections, unshakable composure, and quiet mastery of strategy all made sense now. Her presence had not been a fluke. It was the embodiment of authority, born of experience and achievement. The private who had confronted her days before felt a wave of embarrassment and awe. He had assumed dominance based on size, youth, and the arrogance of inexperience. Now, standing in the shadow of a general, he felt a mixture of fear, respect, and shame. Every misstep, every attempt at intimidation now seemed trivial, almost laughable in light of her rank and accomplishments. The lesson was clear. He had underestimated her in every possible way. The sergeant continued, handing her a ceremonial insignia. She accepted it without fanfare, pinning it neatly on her uniform. Soldiers in the formation could now see the golden oak leaves that signified her rank, gleaming in the morning sunlight, a tangible symbol of the authority she had already demonstrated. The private swallowed hard, realizing that every subtle warning, every calm correction, and every demonstration of skill had been leading to this moment, a moment that confirmed what everyone had only suspected. She was exceptional, untouchable, and undeniably in command. "Effective immediately," the sergeant said, "all soldiers are to follow her directives as part of standard protocol. This includes training exercises, strategic planning, and operational guidance." He paused, letting the words sink in. The private's mind raced. He had thought he understood authority. He had thought he had the upper hand. He had been wrong, completely. She stepped forward slightly, addressing the soldiers now directly. "I am here to ensure that every action you take, every decision you make, is guided by precision, discipline, and integrity. Respect is earned through execution, not bravado. My rank does not exist to intimidate, but to guide, correct, and elevate your performance." Her words were calm, measured, yet each carried the undeniable weight of experience. The soldiers listened, some nodding slowly, others wide-eyed, all absorbing the truth of her authority. The young private who had once tried to punch her felt a heavy knot in his stomach. He had been tested, subtly humiliated by her competence, and now confronted with undeniable proof of her power. Pride and ego collided with respect and fear. He couldn't meet her eyes at first, feeling the sharp sting of realization that his assumptions had been entirely misplaced. But in that moment, a seed of understanding took root. Authority and skill cannot be challenged by bluster or force. They are proven through action, experience, and mastery. The rest of the day was surreal. Soldiers who had mocked or doubted her in previous drills now approached with cautious respect, observing her every movement and interaction. Even those who had been distant or dismissive were now attentive, eager to learn, to understand, to absorb any lesson she might impart. She didn't demand attention or submission. It was given freely, willingly, and with growing admiration. By afternoon, word had spread across the base. Soldiers who had not witnessed her demonstrations directly were now hearing first-hand accounts of her precision, calm authority, and unshakable leadership. The reputation that had begun as whispers of curiosity was now cemented as undeniable fact. She was a general, and her presence reshaped the social and operational hierarchy of the base instantly. The private who had challenged her could barely process the transformation. In just a few days, the woman he had sought to intimidate had dismantled his ego, proven her competence, and claimed respect, not through aggression, but through skill, calm authority, and finally, rank. The lesson was complete. Underestimating her had been a dangerous mistake, one that he would remember for the rest of his career. As the sun set behind the training yard, she walked through the ranks, inspecting, advising, and observing. Soldiers followed her lead naturally, no longer questioning her authority, no longer attempting to test her boundaries. The attempted confrontation, the subtle warnings, and now the revelation of her rank had transformed the atmosphere completely. Respect had replaced doubt. Awe had replaced arrogance. The private lingered at the back, silently observing, reflecting on the lessons he had learned in a matter of days. The humiliation of underestimation was bitter, but the respect it cultivated was invaluable. He understood now what many others had only glimpsed. Authority is not claimed through confrontation or size, but through consistent competence, strategic awareness, and the lived experience that only time and dedication can bring. By nightfall, the base had fully adjusted to the new reality. Soldiers who had once whispered, laughed, or mocked now discussed strategy, efficiency, and precision, guided by her subtle influence. Her presence was no longer a novelty. It was the standard. And for those who had doubted her, the memory of failed intimidation and now undeniable rank served as a powerful lesson. She was not merely a recruit. She was a general, and her authority was absolute, respected, and earned through every precise, calculated step she had taken to arrive at this moment. The morning after the announcement of her rank, the atmosphere at Fort Eisenhower had shifted completely. Soldiers moved with a new awareness, glancing toward the general with a mix of admiration, curiosity, and cautious respect. Even those who had previously doubted her, mocked her, or attempted intimidation now approached with quiet attentiveness, recognizing the authority she carried, not just in rank, but in skill, composure, and leadership. The young private who had tried to punch her lingered at the back of formations, his pride bruised but his mind absorbing lessons he had long ignored. She arrived at the training yard with her usual calm precision. Every step was deliberate, every movement intentional. Soldiers straightened instinctively as she walked past. Unlike other leaders who relied on loud commands or visible displays of authority, she inspired respect through action, example, and subtle intervention. Even the instructors, seasoned officers who had seen decades of recruits and challenges, could not deny the impact she had on morale, discipline, and efficiency. Her presence alone changed the tone of the yard, quietly transforming chaos into order. The day began with routine drills, but she subtly added complexity to each exercise. Soldiers had to navigate obstacles while maintaining strategic awareness, teamwork, and precision under pressure. Mistakes were corrected immediately, but never harshly. She demonstrated the proper form, adjusted postures, and offered concise guidance that left no room for doubt. Every correction reinforced her authority, showing the recruits that leadership was not about intimidation. It was about mastery and precision. Even those who had once mocked her followed her instructions willingly, motivated not by fear, but by the desire to meet the high standards she embodied. The young private who had challenged her observed silently, nodding every subtle nuance in her approach. She did not command attention through theatrics, she commanded it through competence. When a soldier stumbled during a maneuver, she intervened with a simple adjustment of stance and a quiet word of instruction. The mistake was corrected instantly, but the process imparted an unspoken lesson. Authority stems from skill, foresight, and the ability to elevate others. The private could feel his previous arrogance eroding with every demonstration, replaced by a reluctant admiration he could not ignore. As the day progressed, she initiated team exercises that required cooperation, communication, and strategic planning. Soldiers who had once been at odds now found themselves working together, guided by her subtle interventions. She noticed disagreements before they escalated, corrected them with precision, and encouraged collaboration without taking overt control. The yard became a place of learning, discipline, and camaraderie, a transformation that had begun subtly but was now unmistakable. The young private watched, realizing that her true power lay not in confrontation but in her ability to unite, inspire, and guide. During a mid-morning break, she approached the private who had tried to punch her and a few others from his group. She did not scold or humiliate them. She spoke quietly, with measured words that carried the weight of experience. "Your efforts are wasted if your ego leads your actions," she said. "Learn from what you see. Respect is not given. It is earned through precision, discipline, and awareness." The words stung, but also illuminated the path forward. For the first time, the private understood that his previous behavior had been driven by insecurity and misplaced bravado. The rest of the morning continued with rigorous tactical drills. Soldiers moved with growing confidence, yet each was mindful of the general's presence, aware that she observed every action, every choice, every misstep. Her guidance was subtle but effective. She did not dominate, she facilitated. Soldiers began to internalize her lessons, correcting themselves before she intervened. The yard, once a chaotic landscape of competing egos, was now a model of disciplined efficiency, a testament to the quiet but undeniable influence of her leadership. By afternoon, the cultural shift was evident. Soldiers who had previously challenged her were now seeking her guidance, asking for feedback on technique and observing her every movement. The young private approached her cautiously, hesitant to speak but eager to learn. "General," he said quietly, "can you show me the correct way to approach coordination in drills?" She nodded, calm and patient, and demonstrated with him step by step. The lesson was subtle, yet profound. She taught not by force or ego, but by modeling excellence, allowing others to rise to the standard she embodied. Her influence extended beyond the physical drills. She began to offer insights into strategic thinking, decision-making under pressure, and situational awareness. Soldiers listened, rapt, realizing that she was shaping not just their skills but their mindset. Every comment, every demonstration, reinforced her authority, earned through competence and experience rather than rank alone. The young private felt a growing respect, a transformation of perspective that was as humbling as it was enlightening. He understood that leadership was not about proving oneself, but about guiding, elevating, and commanding through skill and wisdom. As the day drew to a close, she gathered the soldiers for a debrief. The discussion was focused, constructive, and infused with her subtle guidance. Soldiers shared observations, received feedback, and reflected on lessons learned. The young private found himself actively participating, absorbing principles he had never considered. The transformation was remarkable. Those who had once doubted her now sought to emulate her discipline and approach. Respect had been earned not through confrontation, but through competence, patience, and the consistent demonstration of excellence. By evening, the base had been transformed. The influence of the general was evident in every corner. Soldiers moved with intention, communicated with clarity, and executed tasks with newfound discipline. The young private reflected quietly, acknowledging his previous mistakes and the lessons he had learned. He understood now that authority and respect are not seized through ego or force. They are cultivated through skill, guidance, and consistent demonstration of competence. The shadows stretched across the training yard as she walked toward the barracks, calm and composed. Soldiers followed her lead naturally, no longer questioning her authority. The attempted confrontations, subtle warnings, and ultimate revelation of rank had created a profound transformation. She had earned respect not by demanding it, but by embodying it in every action. Her presence had elevated the base, reshaping its culture and instilling discipline, teamwork, and admiration among those who had once doubted her. That night, soldiers discussed the day quietly in their quarters, sharing stories of her subtle interventions, precise guidance, and transformative influence. The young private, still absorbing the lessons, realized that his initial arrogance had been replaced with humility and genuine respect. The general had not only asserted her authority, but had created a legacy of excellence that would influence every soldier at Fort Eisenhower for years to come. By the time the base fell silent, the lesson was complete. Respect is earned through action, guidance, and competence, not ego or intimidation. The general had demonstrated this with flawless execution, calm authority, and subtle leadership. Those who had once doubted her now understood a fundamental truth. She was a leader in every sense, and her influence would continue to shape the base long after the day had ended. The morning fog lingered over Fort Eisenhower, softening the sharp edges of the training yard. Soldiers moved with the rhythm of newly instilled discipline, the lessons of the past days still fresh in their minds. The general, calm and composed as always, arrived with the subtle authority that had already reshaped the base's culture. The young private who had attempted to punch her now walked with cautious attentiveness, aware that every action, every decision would be observed, and that observation carried weight. Today was not about drills or personal skill. It was about teamwork, cohesion, and trust. The general had designed a series of exercises that would test the soldiers' ability to work together, communicate effectively, and execute complex maneuvers under pressure. She understood that discipline alone was insufficient. A well-trained but fractured team could falter in moments of real challenge. Leadership, she knew, meant forging unity from diversity, guiding individuals to operate as a cohesive unit. The soldiers gathered, forming small squads. She moved among them, observing, noting patterns, and listening closely. Her calm presence was magnetic, naturally drawing attention without demand. She offered subtle guidance to those struggling with coordination, never publicly shamming anyone, but always ensuring that errors were corrected immediately and effectively. The young private, now painfully aware of his own previous arrogance, watched intently, absorbing lessons not just in skill but in the essence of leadership. The first exercise was deceptively simple. Squads were tasked with navigating an obstacle course that required synchronization, strategic decision-making, and trust. Soldiers who had once prioritized personal achievement found themselves needing to adapt to the group, follow signals, and anticipate teammates' movements. The general observed silently, stepping in only when a subtle adjustment could make the difference between success and failure. Her guidance was precise, her interventions minimal yet transformative, allowing soldiers to learn the value of collaboration organically. Tension arose naturally, as it always does in team exercises. Differences in speed, experience, and temperament threatened to fracture squads. Arguments flared quietly, some volunteers becoming frustrated with perceived inefficiencies. The general approached the young private's squad, noting the underlying tension. Without raising her voice, she positioned herself so every member could see and hear her clearly. "Your strength is irrelevant if it is not coordinated," she said softly. "Observe, communicate, and adjust. Trust your team, not just your own abilities." The statement was simple, yet it resonated deeply, immediately diffusing tension and redirecting focus. The squad moved again, now guided by her calm authority and subtle interventions. Soldiers began to anticipate one another's actions, moving in harmony instead of chaos. The young private, now fully engaged, realized the depth of the lesson. Leadership is not just about individual skill or dominance. It is about facilitating cohesion, fostering trust, and creating an environment where every member can perform optimally. The transformation was palpable, the shift from fragmented individuals to a unified unit nearly instantaneous. Other squads observed the change, some inspired, others challenged to reach the same level of coordination. The general moved silently between groups, offering small, precise adjustments, brief words of encouragement, and occasional strategic observations. Her influence was subtle yet undeniable. Soldiers who had doubted her, mocked her, or attempted to undermine her authority were now fully engaged, eager to learn and motivated to follow her example. The young private, once overconfident and dismissive, felt a profound shift in his understanding of respect, leadership, and teamwork. By midday, the exercises had evolved into complex, multi-stage operations. Squads were required to execute coordinated strategies, respond to simulated threats, and adjust dynamically to changing scenarios. The general observed with unerring precision, noting errors before they escalated and correcting them with minimal intervention. Her calm authority created an environment where soldiers could push themselves to their limits without fear, knowing guidance was available but would not stifle initiative. Trust, she demonstrated, was built not through command alone but through consistent, fair, and effective leadership. Lunch was a quiet affair, with soldiers reflecting on the morning's exercises. Conversations centered around lessons learned, improvements needed, and observations of the general's approach. Some were in awe of her ability to unify and guide without overt displays of power. Others marveled at her precision, calm demeanor, and strategic insight. The young private, once brash and impulsive, now found himself analyzing every move, every word, and every gesture, understanding that true leadership was a delicate balance of authority, observation, and facilitation. The afternoon brought the final, most challenging exercise, a simulated rescue operation requiring seamless cooperation, strategic communication, and precise execution under time pressure. Soldiers were tested on everything they had learned, from personal skill to teamwork, from strategic thinking to trust in their teammates. The general observed closely, offering subtle guidance, correcting errors with quiet authority, and providing encouragement where needed. Her presence alone inspired focus, discipline, and confidence, transforming what could have been a chaotic operation into a controlled, high-performing exercise. The young private's squad, once disjointed and unfocused, now executed the simulation flawlessly. Every soldier moved in harmony, anticipating one another's actions, communicating clearly, and adapting dynamically to changing conditions. The lessons of the past days, humility, respect, skill, and leadership, culminated in a single, unified performance. The general observed, satisfied but silent, allowing the soldiers to internalize the achievement as their own. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the soldiers gathered for debriefing. The general spoke quietly, her tone measured and calm, yet carrying the undeniable authority of experience. "You have learned the value of coordination, trust, and observation," she said. "A team is only as strong as its weakest link, and true strength lies in your ability to lift one another. Remember, respect is earned not by asserting dominance, but by elevating those around you." Her words, simple yet profound, resonated with every soldier present. The young private, reflecting on the journey from arrogance to respect, understood the full depth of her lessons. He realized that his initial attempts at confrontation had been misguided, his assumptions and his pride misplaced. Through subtle warnings, demonstrations of skill, and now the unifying exercises, the general had reshaped his understanding of leadership, respect, and teamwork. He felt a profound sense of gratitude and awe, knowing that the lessons he had learned would guide him throughout his career. By nightfall, Fort Eisenhower had transformed. Soldiers moved with purpose, communicated effectively, and executed tasks with cohesion and precision. The general's influence had not only earned their respect but had united them, turning a collection of individuals into a coordinated, disciplined, and capable team. Her authority, now fully recognized, extended beyond rank. It was felt, internalized, and reflected in the behavior of every soldier on the base. As she walked toward the barracks, the young private followed at a respectful distance, absorbing every detail of her calm, deliberate movements. He understood that leadership was not a matter of ego, force, or loud commands. It was the ability to unite, guide, and elevate, creating an environment where individuals could achieve collective excellence. Her presence had transformed the base, and he knew that the lessons of unity, respect, and teamwork would endure long after the day ended. That night, soldiers discussed the day in quiet groups, sharing observations, insights, and reflections. The general had accomplished more than tactical training. She had forged unity, instilled trust, and elevated the entire base to a level of cohesion previously unseen. Her leadership had become a model of excellence, demonstrating that true authority is not imposed, but cultivated, respected, and internalized. The young private lay awake that night, reflecting on the journey from arrogance to respect, from confrontation to understanding. He understood now that authority is not about proving dominance. It is about guiding, inspiring, and uniting. And the general, who had quietly transformed Fort Eisenhower in a matter of days, had that lesson in every action, every word, and every precise, deliberate step she had taken. The sun rose over Fort Eisenhower, casting golden light across the training yard, reflecting the transformation that had taken place over the past week. Soldiers moved with purpose and coordination, their actions precise, disciplined, and unified. What had begun as a place of raw recruits, uncertainty, and ego-driven bravado had become a hub of efficiency, cooperation, and mutual respect. At the center of this transformation stood the general, the woman who had been underestimated, tested, and ultimately revered. Her presence was quiet but commanding. She walked among the soldiers, observing drills, correcting errors, and offering guidance where needed. No one doubted her authority. It had been earned through skill, composure, and leadership. Even the young private who had attempted to punch her days ago moved with newfound respect and attentiveness. His arrogance had been replaced with humility, understanding, and a deep desire to emulate the qualities she had demonstrated so effortlessly. The base was buzzing with energy, yet there was harmony in the rhythm of activity. Soldiers communicated efficiently, anticipated one another's movements, and executed complex drills with seamless precision. The lessons imparted by the general had not only improved technical skill, but had instilled a profound sense of trust, collaboration, and accountability. Mistakes were corrected swiftly, not through criticism, but through careful observation and guidance, ensuring that every soldier understood not just what to do, but why it mattered. The general paused at the edge of the training field, watching a squad execute a coordinated tactical maneuver. Their movements were synchronized, their communication clear, their decision-making deliberate. She allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. This was more than a demonstration of skill. It was a testament to the transformation of the entire base. Her influence had become the foundation upon which discipline, trust, and excellence thrived. Every soldier had internalized the principles she embodied. Respect is earned, leadership is demonstrated, and unity is paramount. The young private approached cautiously, carrying a small notebook of observations he had made throughout the week. "General," he said respectfully, his voice subdued yet earnest, "I wanted to share what I've learned from your guidance." She nodded, motioning for him to continue. He spoke carefully, detailing the lessons on precision, teamwork, humility, and the subtle ways in which she had reshaped their understanding of leadership. Her calm gaze followed him, absorbing his words without interruption, yet every movement of hers conveyed encouragement and acknowledgement. By midday, the base gathered for a ceremonial review. Soldiers lined the yard, their formation crisp and precise, each reflecting the lessons of the past week. The general stood before them, silent but fully aware of the magnitude of the moment. The instructors, who had overseen countless recruits in decades of service, watched with awe as the once chaotic yard transformed into a model of discipline and cohesion. It was a visual testament to her impact, an indelible mark of leadership and mastery. The young private stood among his squad, his posture now confident yet respectful. He glanced at the general and felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had entered this week brimming with ego and assumptions, ready to assert dominance without understanding the stakes. By the end, he had witnessed the power of composure, the efficacy of subtle authority, and the transformative force of genuine skill and guidance. The lesson was indelible. Leadership is not about asserting oneself through fear or confrontation. It is about elevating others, creating unity, and embodying the principles one wishes to instill. During the review, the general addressed the assembled soldiers. Her voice was calm, deliberate, and infused with quiet authority. You have demonstrated the capacity to rise above individual pride and work together as a cohesive unit. The strength of a team is measured not by the abilities of one, but by the coordination, trust, and effort of all. Remember this. Leadership is not granted by rank alone. It is proven through action, integrity, and the ability to elevate those around you. Her words resonated deeply, echoing through the formation and settling into the consciousness of every soldier present. The afternoon was devoted to reflection and consolidation. Soldiers gathered in small groups, discussing lessons learned, challenges overcome, and the personal growth they had experienced. The young private found himself recounting the moments when his assumptions were challenged, when his ego had been gently humbled, and when he had begun to understand the depth of true leadership. He realized that these experiences would stay with him, shaping his approach to teamwork, discipline, and authority for the rest of his military career. Evening approached and the base fell into a quieter rhythm. Soldiers completed final drills, stowed equipment, and prepared for the night. The general moved among them one last time, offering guidance, encouragement, and acknowledgement. Her presence was steady, commanding, yet nurturing, a reminder that leadership is not only about authority but also about fostering growth, inspiring trust, and creating an environment where individuals can achieve their highest potential. The young private paused to watch her walk past, reflecting on the transformation he had witnessed in himself and in the base. The arrogance he had once carried was replaced with humility. The desire to dominate was replaced with the understanding of collaboration and mutual respect. He realized that the general's true legacy was not her rank, her skill, or even her strategic acumen, but the culture she had instilled, the mindset she had nurtured, and the unity she had forged among a diverse group of individuals. That night, as the base settled into quiet, the soldiers could not help but share stories of the week. Tales of subtle corrections, precise demonstrations, and moments of unexpected guidance spread from bunk to bunk. They spoke of the young private's transformation, the cohesion of the squads, and the undeniable authority of the general who had quietly reshaped their understanding of leadership. Her presence had left a mark far deeper than mere instruction. It had created a standard, a model, and a legacy that would endure. The general stood at the edge of the yard one final time, observing the base bathed in the soft glow of twilight. Her expression was calm, serene, yet carried the satisfaction of accomplishment. She had arrived as an underestimated recruit, faced challenges, demonstrated skill, asserted authority subtly, and finally revealed her rank. But the true measure of her impact lay not in rank or recognition, but in the soldiers who had learned, adapted, and transformed under her guidance. In the days that followed, the base continued to thrive under her influence. The lessons of humility, precision, teamwork, and subtle authority had been internalized by every soldier, becoming part of the fabric of their training, behavior, and mindset. The young private who had once attempted to punch her now led his squad with a balance of confidence and respect, embodying the principles he had learned. Others mirrored the example she had set, creating a lasting culture of excellence, trust, and unity. Her legacy was not simply her authority, her rank, or her skill. It was the transformation of individuals and the forging of a cohesive, disciplined, and inspired unit. Soldiers would remember the week they had underestimated a recruit, witnessed her mastery, and ultimately learned the true meaning of respect and leadership. They would carry those lessons forward, not only in their military careers, but in every aspect of their lives where integrity, skill, and leadership mattered. And as the final light faded over Fort Eisenhower, the general walked among her soldiers one last time for the day, quiet yet commanding, leaving behind a base forever changed. The young private, standing among his comrades, understood fully that he had witnessed not just training, but the creation of a legacy, one built on quiet strength, precision, and the enduring power of true leadership.